We are here tonight for another session of free community education, which the Lindner Center is really passionate about offering, and has been doing so really since we started over 17 years ago. Thank you to the Countryside YMCA for hosting us tonight. They're very gracious in letting us use their space for our folks that are in person. Thank you also to community partners who have generously been able to do our simulcast of this education series for us for a good amount of time now. We are currently working on our 2026 calendar offerings, so stay tuned for those. Be checking our website as we get those formulated. We'll be posting those. Just a little background on the Lindner Center, if you're not so familiar with us. We have been serving patients of all ages and all mental health diagnoses and addictions for over 17 years, like I mentioned. We offer comprehensive services that meet each individual where they are on their journey. Thank you to our presenter tonight for taking us on a deeper dive of anxiety. We have Whitney Peters with us, who is one of our outpatient therapists. She is a specialist in the treatment of OCD, generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, phobias, and ADHD, and more. Thanks, Whitney, for being here. Thank you again to all of you. Thank you so much to Jennifer. Well, welcome. I am very happy to see so many people here. I did hear that about 200 people signed up, and I'm not surprised because anxiety happens to affect so many people. According to data, people are likely to experience anxiety. In fact, across lifespan, 1 out of 4 people will have anxiety to the degree that it meets the criteria for a disorder. But 10 out of 10 people have been anxious at least once. And so I definitely understand why so many people are interested. I'm very happy to see all the people in person. I'm so very happy that so many people were able to join digitally. So today we're hopefully going to have a little bit of fun, learn some more about anxiety, and find some ways that maybe we can do a little bit better of a job supporting ourselves and the people that we love and we care about. So just a little bit about me. I work for the Lindner Center. I've been there since 2023. I've really loved it. It's been such a great experience. I work with the OCD team. I consider myself an anxiety and OCD specialist. It's a huge passion of mine because I also experience anxiety myself. So not only have I had a lot of extensive training and education in anxiety, I also am very passionate about treating it because I understand what it feels like to live with fear and live with a lot of barriers. But I've also learned, like a lot of people I work with, it does not have to stand in the way of things that you want in life, things that you value. So I work at Lindner. I went to OSU, the Bucks, if you're also a Buckeye. Went to Wright State for grad school, just a little bit about some of my professional history, but also a little bit about my street cred as a person with social anxiety, generalized anxiety. I've had panic attacks before. I'm sure you all remember COVID. That wasn't fun for a lot of us folks with anxiety. So again, this is just such a passionate part of my life, and I'm so excited to share what I know with everybody here and everybody joining online. So what are we going to accomplish? Basically today, I just want to teach a little bit about anxiety. We want to learn what are some of the common myths and misinformation and maybe things that we might be making mistakes about when it comes to anxiety. There's a million articles out there, a million influencers, a million videos that get posted all the time where people say, hey, do you have anxiety? Try this one thing. Try this, is a 5-step list to just getting rid of your anxiety. Unfortunately, sometimes a lot of those things don't work. And it is a little more complicated than that. So I'm hoping today that we can challenge some of those myths. We can understand a little bit more about what actually is helpful so that we can do a better job supporting ourselves and each other. Most people are probably here because they have experienced anxiety. Some of you might be here because you love someone who has anxiety. Or you also have it, but you're too shy to talk about it. And so this is going to be for all of you guys too. But I also want to make sure not only are we helping ourselves, we're helping people that we love and we care about in our families. So without further ado, we do want to talk about what anxiety is. This can sound pretty basic, but it's actually not. A lot of the times we think about anxiety and we think about just being scared. But that's not the only way that people experience anxiety. Some people are anxious and they just appear very irritable. They're stressed, grumpy. They don't call it anxiety, but it is. Sometimes they just get really quiet, they shut down. They might not call that anxiety, but it is. Some people feel overwhelmed. They just feel stressed. They just have a lot going on. And they might not call that anxiety, but it is sometimes. So in order to best treat anxiety, we have to know what it is that we're talking about. And it's better to define it so that we can get better skills for it. So these are just some words that describe anxiety. Some people say they're nervous. Some people just say they're worried, they're stressed. Maybe some people do call it anxiety or just agitated, or they feel panicked, or they are in distress, or they just care a lot is another way to describe anxiety. But somebody in your life might not call it anxiety, and so they might call it a lot of other things. So it's important to know when we really listen to somebody that we love, what are they really saying? You know, if they're talking about being stressed a lot, they're distracted, they are constantly, having jitters and they have a really hard time with situations, we might actually be looking at anxiety. So sometimes they might not call it that, but that doesn't necessarily mean they don't have anxiety. As clinicians, we're trained to listen very carefully to how somebody describes what they're feeling so that we can properly assess them. But as the general public, if we know more about how somebody describes their anxiety, we're better equipped to help them too. And for those of us who maybe don't think we have anxiety, but we do, if you're the kind of person who thinks that maybe you don't have anxiety, you're just stressed or you're just overwhelmed, this might give you something to consider. Maybe something is going on with me that I could do a better job managing. Maybe I can look at it a little differently. So in order to best understand anxiety, I think it's always a good idea to understand more about the body's responses to stress. So some of you might be familiar with the fight and flight response or the stress response. That might sound familiar to a lot of folks. Essentially, the stress response is a normal, natural response. We spend a lot of time in a rest and digest response. We're calm, we can read a book, watch TV program, we can have a conversation, focus on our work. But then something happens. We get a phone call from a random number. We get a request to schedule a dentist appointment. We have homework, we have a test, we have something going on. So our body prepares ourselves, our brains and our bodies, to meet some of that stressor. So let's just say you have to schedule a doctor's appointment. It's your annual physical, you gotta do it. It's generally a good idea to do. But maybe you don't really want to, and it's kind of annoying. And now you have to go pay a copay, and you have to do all the things. So your body prepares you to meet that stressor. It raises your blood pressure, it strengthens your muscles, it sends more mental energy to your brain so that you can concentrate, you can find the doctor's phone number, you can give them a call, you can use muscles to dial the number itself and know what it is that you're asking for. So stress essentially is a normal function that prepares our bodies to meet some kind of demand. But not all the time are these demands so easy. So what ends up happening sometimes is we have a situation or an event and we think, okay, no big deal. I have my annual physical, I do it every year. But what about this year? Maybe I'm not doing so hot. Maybe I haven't been feeling good. Maybe I've had this weird symptom and I'm a little worried. So it's not just the doctor's appointment. Now I'm thinking about the doctor's appointment and what that actually means. And maybe I'm wondering, what is that doctor going to say? What if they have really bad news? What if they have awful news? And now I have to tell my family that I'm not okay. What if I can't take the time off work? What if I can't afford the bill that comes in the mail afterwards? So it's not just the event, it's what we think about the event. So now I'm worried about the bill, I'm worried about the time, I'm worried about the results. My blood pressure raises even more. My heart starts pounding, I start getting sweaty. I don't want to call. Maybe I just put it off and I avoid it, even though I know I shouldn't, but I just can't bear into it. So this is kind of where stress starts to turn into anxiety. So I like to share this equation, which was taught to me many years ago, but I always found it really useful, is that a stressor or demand mixed with the thoughts of a perceived inability to cope. So I have something that I need to do or something that's going to happen, but I also don't believe that I can handle it. I don't believe I can pay for it. I don't believe I can manage it. It's way far beyond my resources and my capacity. Now I'm gonna be even more stressed and anxious. My anxiety level, so my normal stress response, doesn't rise just to meet the demand in front of me, it rises to meet the imagined threats and perceptions and thoughts of what this demand might mean. So now I'm even more anxious. So this is always good to keep in mind. Plus a perceived inability to cope. I can't handle it, it's too much, it's gonna be too hard, it's too dangerous. Now I'm anxious. So this is something that's useful. But anxiety is not all created equal. So everybody in here has felt anxious at one point. If you say that you haven't, I won't believe you because this is a normal natural function that everybody feels. But anxiety is a temporary state of worry. So let's just say I make that doctor's appointment, I finally go, I get it over with, and now I feel better. I didn't get the bad results. I felt proud of myself that I could do something hard. That's typical anxiety. Anxiety that happens, it's short term. We call it acute, and that it is small and short, kind of cute. Anxiety disorders are a little bit different. So anxiety disorder is anxiety states that are way too intense, that happen way too often, and are generally disproportionate to the event. So if I'm anxious once in a while, that is normal, that's typical. Everybody feels anxious. But if I'm anxious so much and so intensely that now I am having a difficult time engaging fully in my life, that meets the criteria for a disorder. Similarly, I would say a headache. We all have had headaches, unless you're very lucky. And most of the time you get them once in a while, you take a Tylenol or an ibuprofen, you take a nap, you go to sleep, and it doesn't necessarily interrupt your life, it doesn't happen all the time. But if you have a headache every day for months, and it's so intense that now you can't cook or sleep or work, now you have a disorder. So we have typical situations that are uncomfortable, but if they happen too intensely, too often, then we can have an anxiety disorder. And this is an important distinction because we want to know, how do I best manage my anxiety? The better answers will be if you have anxiety states that are pretty general and typical, or if you have a disorder. Luckily, all of the tips that I'm going to share with you today and the myths that we're going to be busting are suitable for whether or not you have typical anxiety or disordered anxiety. So regardless of how you feel your anxiety, everything we talk about today will be generally helpful. But to what degree it will be helpful and how much you might need to apply these kinds of skills will vary depending on whether or not you have typical or disordered anxiety. So these are some anxiety disorders. It's kind of just information to know. Some anxiety disorders are trigger specific in that certain things cause them. So people with generalized anxiety are anxious about everything. So this would be the person you might know who, if you go to dinner with your friends, they worry, did I bring my wallet? Did I bring my phone? Did my friends bring their phones? Are we gonna be late? Is somebody gonna veer into my lane? What if the restaurant ends up being closed? What are we gonna do? So they worry about everything all the time. These are the folks you might know who have more of a busy mind. So their anxiety functions about a lot of different kinds of things. Phobias, on the other hand, are more specific. So these are the folks that have fears of spiders, buildings, certain places, medical procedures like needles. So they don't necessarily feel their anxiety all the time, the way somebody with generalized anxiety might. They feel intense anxiety with specific kinds of things. Most of the time they can avoid, but sometimes they can't. Social anxiety is pretty obvious, but this would be anxiety that presents itself in situations where you're presented with a social situation. So often with relationships where somebody might feel that they might be rejected by someone or a whole group of people. But rejection tends to be the biggest fear with social anxiety. Separation anxiety, some of you with kids might have experienced this where they really have a hard time being away from mom or dad, and dropping them off at school or daycare is a nightmare because they're so scared, or they can't sleep alone in their room because they just can't bear to be separate. So they're not scared all the time, but they're scared of specific situations. Another type of anxiety that isn't necessarily a specific situation is what I like to kind of call the faulty fire alarm, where somebody with panic disorder might just be walking around Kroger and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they feel this intense dread and heart pounding and sweating and panic, and they have no idea where it came from because it came from nowhere. And the reason I like to call it the faulty fire alarm is because if you had a fire alarm in your house, it would go off for a real fire, but it would also go off if you were burning toast. And if it was a really bad one, it would go off for no reason at all. So some people's nervous systems have a faulty switch on their stress response that can sometimes cause them panic for no reason at all. And this can be very, very difficult. Other types of anxiety can be caused by certain kinds of situations. So most people with anxiety, this runs in their family. There's a huge family heritability rate. If you have anxiety or know someone who does, it is highly likely that people in their family also have anxiety. It's overwhelmingly the majority of women tend to have anxiety. Men have it too, but we kind of think that they might not be reporting it as much since there's a little more stigma. But other kinds of anxiety can be induced by medications or even substances. So overuse of alcohol, if you're maybe ADHD, you start a stimulant medication. Now all of a sudden you're anxious all of the time. Sometimes medications and substances can start anxiety disorder. Medical issues, especially things like POTS, hyperthyroidism, menopause, postpartum. Our bodies are an interconnected, complex network of systems that all affect each other. And so medical issues can also start to cause anxiety. Interestingly, we're learning a lot more about how hormones affect anxiety. So we're learning a lot more about specifically how estrogen fluctuations or deficits in estrogen affect our body's ability to regulate itself emotionally. And so a lot of women, or during postpartum, or experiences where maybe perimenopause, where their hormones might be in flux for a determined amount of time, might never have had much anxiety in the past, or disordered anxiety, but now suddenly be experiencing disordered anxiety. So this is important to know. Anxiety is a normal, natural response. It happens because we don't believe we can capably survive a demand or a stressor. And most of the time it's typical, but sometimes it's not typical. And how you can tell it's not typical is if it happens way too intensely, way more of the time, and it starts to interfere with your life. So this is just important information to know about anxiety. Once we start trying to understand the misinformation and mistakes people make, now we know a little bit more about where the anxiety is coming from, the specific symptoms that we'd be referring to. So without further ado, we're gonna get into the 7 common mistakes. So what you've all been excited to learn. So the first mistake that I think is really important, and a lot of people might experience this in their life, I would say most people, is trying to handle anxiety alone. Trying to do it all by yourself, never talking to somebody about it, too much isolation, we just keep it to ourselves, we never say anything. So instead of texting our friend, hey, I don't really want to come out tonight, I just don't think I can, I'm really having a hard time, everything is making me so anxious. We just don't text them back, or we just don't go. Or maybe we do need groceries and we're kind of running low, but the thought of going to the grocery store is so overwhelming that we just don't. And we just live off of saltines for a few days. So trying to handle it alone is generally a very, very poor mistake, but a lot of people make it. And there's a lot of reasons why. So one reason is because we might not even know we have anxiety. But the most common reason has to do with stigma. So anxiety, while common and more openly talked about recently than it had been before, is still very much a stigmatized experience. And these are some common myths that people will believe or even tell each other that further perpetuates the stigma of anxiety. And when we stigmatize something, we essentially make it embarrassing and shameful and impossible for a person to reach out to talk to someone about. So some of these myths include people with anxiety are just weak. People with anxiety are just making excuses. They could do it, but they just don't want to. People with anxiety are choosing to think and feel that way. Have you ever had somebody tell you to calm down? And did it work? Or did you just trade that anxiety for rage? Probably. Right? Right, exactly. Because we're not actually choosing to be anxious. We're not choosing to have these thoughts. But some people think you are. Some people think you can't. Some people think it's just that easy. Sadly, it is not. If it was, half of the therapists would be out of the job. So another myth and stigmatized idea is that you can just snap out of it if you try harder. Just try. And like squeeze your hands really tight and just try to stop. Doesn't work. And further perpetuates the idea anxiety is wrong and it's bad if you have it and you should be embarrassed, and so you don't ever tell anybody about it. So also people are just overreacting, they're just being dramatic. Going to therapy is for weak people. This is one of the most important. It's not masculine to have anxiety. Men should be tough. So this is probably not a surprise, but most people who seek therapy services happen to be women. There are just as many men who have mental health struggles. But there tends to be a lot of rhetoric around how men should be strong. They shouldn't have a hard time dealing with their emotions, especially fear. That is the one emotion as a man, generally people are taught you're not allowed to have. You're allowed to be angry, you're maybe allowed to be sad if your football team loses, but you're definitely not allowed to be scared. And this keeps a lot of men up from being able to feel like they deserve to seek help for their symptoms. Men are actually 4 times more likely to commit suicide for mental health related reasons. I know it's a very scary thought, but it's definitely an important thing that I think we need to address. So when we want to spread awareness around mental health, we can't forget that there are some people who experience more stigma than others. Men happen to be a really huge part of that group. Lastly, and this is the one that drives me nuts, just use this supplement. Just try this essential oil. Just hold on to this crystal. If you just say banana in your head enough times, you'll stop feeling anxious. The reason why I don't like it and why it perpetuates a lot of stigma is because it implies that anxiety is a really easy thing to fix. And if you haven't fixed it, it's because something is wrong with you. So I like to share these ideas because some people might have been told these things to their face. They also just might have heard other people talk about it and start to wonder to themselves, what is wrong with me? If this is so easy and it's so wrong of me and weak of me to have anxiety, I should never tell anyone ever. And I should just try to deal with it myself. But isolation tends to worsen anxiety symptoms. And isolation also tends to perpetuate a lack of perspective. So if I'm alone in my house and I never tell anybody how I'm doing and I never talk about it, I sit in an echo chamber of my own thoughts and I'm less likely to consider other alternatives. I'm less likely to think about how maybe the grocery store isn't so bad on a Tuesday morning when everyone's at work. Maybe I can go then. Maybe it's okay to be anxious. Maybe my friend is also anxious too. So isolation is generally a huge mistake, and it can be very scary to reach out with something that inside we've been taught is wrong and bad and should be super easy to fix, but it's not. And it's not wrong and it's not bad. And it does have the capability to severely limit our lives. Anxiety disorders can sometimes be debilitating in that they can keep people from work, they can keep people from their families. And those are the things that you can't get back. The only thing that you can't ever get back is more of is time. And we don't really have a lot of it to waste. So I really like to make sure I address first, handling anxiety alone is a mistake. We do recommend reaching out to somebody, sorry, went too far. We do recommend reaching out to someone you care about, even a friend, a religious or faith leader, a family member. If you can reach out to a doctor or therapist, we absolutely recommend that. But guess what? Healthcare is not free, and there are a lot of barriers. Sometimes we can't meet the schedule. Sometimes we can't afford it. Sometimes we don't even have insurance. And so there are a lot of free support groups, free webinars, free books, podcasts, etc. And I'm going to teach you more about that later. If you are a person or you know people who struggle with being able to access mental health care, there absolutely are options. But the one option we don't necessarily want people to take is keeping it all to themselves. So the next mistake, I gave you a preview, is relying only on medication. So maybe you say, okay, Whitney, fine. I'll talk to somebody. I'll go to my doctor. Fine. So maybe your doctor does assess that you have an anxiety disorder. They say, based on what you're telling me, it sounds like you have generalized anxiety and it's severe enough that it's getting in the way of your life. We do think maybe you should try medication. So you say, okay, fine. I'll try something. I talk to somebody, cool. But now you're only relying on medication. Why this is a mistake is that medication can be beneficial. Typical anxiety is not usually treated with medication. More severe anxiety is, because it is a legitimate psychiatric disorder, and legitimate disorders do deserve to be treated. But there is a little bit of a misstep here. So taking medication can be beneficial at managing anxiety. It can absolutely help regulate intense emotional states. It can help slow racing thoughts, and it is beneficial, but it's not sufficient at treating the anxiety and essentially the core or the root cause of the anxiety. And this is because anxiety tends to be behaviorally maintained. When we're anxious, How we think about how we're anxious and what we do when we are anxious keeps us perpetuated in the anxiety cycle. So I'm going to share more about what that looks like. So let's just say we go back to the doctor's appointment example. And this is the start of my worry cycle. I'm really worried to go to the doctor. I don't know what he's gonna say or she's gonna say. Maybe I'm really worried I can't afford it, like I said, or I'm worried these results could be like a nightmare. This could be the worst thing I can think of. So then maybe I don't go. Or maybe I just put it off, or maybe I'm so nervous about it that I need an appointment and I call them every 5 minutes until someone picks up. Maybe I overdo it. Or maybe I have a social event or a presentation to give in front of a bunch of people, and I'm very nervous about it. And so maybe instead of avoiding it, or maybe I think about it, maybe I decide, you know what if I cancel? I don't know if I can go to that party. I don't know if I can just be around all those people. I'm just not gonna go. I know I haven't seen any of them since high school, but I just can't do it. Or maybe I can, but I have to have a couple drinks. I can't do it without a couple of drinks. I have to have something. Or I can go, but I have to have my best friend with me the entire time. I can't go by myself. So we have something that makes us worry. How we engage with that anxiety might determine whether or not I stay anxious about that thing. So if I don't go, and now I still have to make that doctor's appointment, and I put it off for a week, a month, a couple months, now I'm even more anxious about having to make that call. If I don't go to that social event, and now there's another event, I'm even more anxious to go. Or maybe I went, but I drank the whole time just to ease the anxiety. Well, now I don't feel like I can do it sober. I have essentially taught my nervous system that I can't do it unless I have these kinds of skills or steps. So I can't do it at all because I avoided it, or I can't do it unless I have things that make me feel more calm, make me feel more safe. So this is when we're stuck in the anxiety cycle. So I'm already anxious, I've been anxious. Maybe I've been anxious about this thing for years. I still avoid it, or I use some unhealthy coping skills. And maybe I get some short-term relief from that, but I'm giving myself long-term anxiety. So the reason why taking medication alone is beneficial, but it's not sufficient at treating the root cause of the anxiety, is because anxiety disorders tend to be behaviorally maintained. How we act when we're anxious can be the difference between whether or not we stay anxious about that thing or not. So let's just say I go to that friend group, I go to the party, I have a really good time, I don't overuse substances, and I learn, you know what, that wasn't that. I did it, I'm really proud of myself, I could do it. Not only do I know that, but my nervous system learns that thing was way more survivable than I ever expected it could be, and maybe I don't have to be as nervous next time. Maybe my nervous system doesn't have to send out those panic signals because it learned that something was way more doable, and I did have the resources that I needed to cope with that demand. So I could cope even though I didn't think so. So, okay. So, fine, Whitney, I talked to somebody, I talked to my doctor, I take medication, but I'm not just relying on that, but now what do I do? Well, this is one that I see a lot in clinical practice, avoiding what makes you anxious. This is something that happens a lot. A lot of people feel like if they have triggers for their anxiety, they shouldn't do them. They really need to exert a lot of effort to stay away from what's making them anxious. But as we just learned, because anxiety is behaviorally maintained, avoiding things that make us anxious actually keep us more anxious. So what we try to do instead is gradually expose ourselves. Maybe I'm scared of the grocery store. I really don't want to go in there. There's people in there. There's germs in there. I don't know what I'm going to encounter. Sometimes there are people yelling. It's just a really uncomfortable situation. So I avoid it. And maybe I start talking about it. And then maybe I talk to my doctor. And maybe now medication's not always recommended. And it's not always something people are okay with. It's a personal decision. And that's okay. So maybe instead I just want to start working on my anxiety. But how do I start? So instead, what I might want to do, instead of avoiding the things that make me anxious, I might just go sit in the parking lot of the grocery store. I might just start there, or just driving by. Then maybe I just walk up to the door and check out the mums in the front, but then I go right back to my car. And then I walk in the front, and then I check out the produce area, I buy maybe one thing, and then I leave. I start really, really, really small. And before I know it, I am so much more able to handle it. My nervous system learns that even if it thinks I couldn't cope, and I didn't have the resources to handle it, I did. I could do it. And I do it in little ways at a time. So an example that I like to share in terms of escaping anxiety is a couple of different things to keep in mind. So we want to challenge our anxious thoughts. I don't think I can go. I can't handle the grocery store. Absolutely not. I don't have what it takes. It's too much for me. Well, is it? Is it really too much to sit in the parking lot? Is it too much to go up and grab a cart, but then put it back and then go back to my car? Maybe I can handle those things, but by starting small. I gradually expose myself to some of the triggers for my anxiety. And then I also get a chance to enhance my confidence. I learned that I can handle the things that I didn't think I could handle before. So this is one example. So maybe somebody has a fear of snakes and somebody starts really, really small with just listening to somebody say the word snake. They just think about the snake, they hear their friends say it, or they hear it on like a documentary program. Then maybe we stare at a snake photo for a minute. So I start really small, and then I move up. Then maybe I observe a snake in a glass tank, which seems like a lot at first, but once we've already heard somebody say snake and seen pictures of it a million times, doesn't feel like a big deal. Then we actually touch a snake, which at first never felt possible, starts to feel a little more possible. And then maybe you get to hold the snake. You maybe don't have to. At a certain point, some things are not necessary. You don't have to go to the grocery store at 5 p.m. on a Thursday when everybody else is there. But you do maybe want to do little exposures at a time. Build on some of that success. So exposure is helpful for helping our anxiety become less intense. Other kinds of emotions work this way too. So since it's Halloween, I'm sure a lot of people have stashes of candy at their house. And if you had one of your favorite pieces of candy, it would be amazing. But if you had to have 35 of them in a row every day until Halloween, eventually you would be so sick of it. So even positive emotions respond to exposure. The more we do something, the less intense our emotional response tends to be. So this is how we help somebody gain a little more control over their anxiety and start to do the things in their lives that they want to do and the things that they should do. So not only is avoidance a bad idea, it also isn't very helpful. So this is another example. Avoidance is also impossible sometimes. So maybe you can avoid going to the grocery store, but if you try to avoid thinking about all the things that would happen at the grocery store, you would fail at it. So this is a fun experiment. I don't think pink elephants exist in real life, but I wish they did. But if you try to tell yourself, do not think about a pink elephant. You can even close your eyes so that you don't have to look at the one on the screen, but don't think about it. Don't think about it at all. Try to not think about it. Shut your eyes and actively force yourself to not think about this pink elephant. And maybe you tell yourself, if I do think about this pink elephant, the room will explode. Something really bad's gonna happen if I think about this. So don't think about it. And you might find out that it's impossible. So not only is it a bad idea to avoid situations that make us anxious, it's also impossible to avoid thinking about things that make us anxious. So it's always a better idea to gradually allow ourselves to experience and expose ourselves to the triggers from our anxiety. We're going to be way more effective at mastering them if we let them happen. But we start small. So one analogy I like to make about anxiety and the discomfort of the anxiety is that, let's just say the grocery store is the destination. The price that you pay or the ticket to this destination is a little bit of anxiety at a time. And it does cost you. It's not free. You can't exactly not get anxiety by never feeling anxiety. You can't master your anxiety by never doing it. But it does cost a little bit at a time. So if you think about the trajectory of your life, maybe you want to get a new job. Maybe there's a big family event coming up. The social anxiety is really hard for you. Maybe it's really hard to even leave the house at all because you're scared if you do, you'll have a panic attack and it will be super intense and it will just be better if you stayed home. The price that you pay to a life with less anxiety is being willing to feel a little bit of anxiety a little bit at a time. So I sort of see it as like a ticket or an admission price, if you will. So something to kind of think about when it comes to anxiety and avoidance. The fifth mistake that people tend to make is trying to eliminate anxiety completely. So fine, I'll talk about my anxiety, I'll go to the doctor, I'll take medicine if I have to, I'll stop avoiding things, I'll do all the stuff that makes me anxious, so I'll finally stop feeling anxious, right? Unfortunately, no, that is not going to work because anxiety is a normal, typical human experience, but ironically, trying to eliminate it completely ends up causing more anxiety. So the goal is not to have zero anxiety. The goal is to have some anxiety that is typical and natural, the way everybody else feels it, that you feel like you are in charge of. Anxiety is a sensation that will alert you to possible danger. Some of those dangers are real. Some of those dangers are possible, hypothetical, maybe scenarios that might not be very likely to happen. So you decide when you're anxious, is this something that I should pay attention to? Or is this something that I need to challenge? Maybe this isn't so likely. Maybe this is something I can try to face because nothing bad has happened yet. I don't have enough evidence that it has. So trying to eliminate anxiety can sometimes be problematic because sometimes what we do to eliminate the anxiety can cause more anxiety. So earlier when I was mentioning the avoidance process, sometimes people will try to eliminate anxiety through use of safety behaviors. So maybe we don't avoid it anymore, but maybe we can do it if we've been drinking, or we've been smoking, or we call our mom the whole time, or we drive ourselves so we can escape if we need to. So trying to eliminate anxiety, constantly trying to feel safe, ends up actually making us feel less safe. Because again, we don't really teach our nervous system that something was actually survivable. We had the ability to cope with that demand, even though we worried we didn't. But it also is ineffective because trying to maintain calm at all times is not something our bodies actually enjoy. It is supposed to be in a state of threat detection. The only reason any of us have gotten far enough in life to make it to this meeting or to log in online is because our threat detection systems have been effective at keeping us alive this long. We have absolutely been in dangerous situations before, and our bodies have let us know. If you're driving on the highway and somebody veers into your lane, your body instinctively slams on the brake or veers over to the right. And you don't even have to think about it. That is your body's natural threat detection system, and it keeps you safe. So trying to eliminate anxiety completely is not ideal. It might make you more anxious, and it also would be a mistake. You might actually not survive that long without it. One of the reasons why a lot of people try to eliminate anxiety though, whether it's general anxiety or a pathological disorder type of anxiety, is because anxiety is a very, very uncomfortable. It can sometimes be painful and a rest. So earlier I mentioned the rest and digest system. So this is the parasympathetic nervous system. This is where you feel calm. You are not really that alert. Maybe you're kind of watching TV, but you're also kind of on your phone at the same time. You're not really paying attention to any of one of them effectively. Your breathing is slow, your heart rate is slow, your muscles are relaxed. Your digestion is the biggest concern in your body right now. Most of your blood flow and electrical activity is focused on extracting nutrients. But then when your fight and flight sympathetic nervous system kicks on, everything changes. So you have an increased alertness and mental capacity. Your mind is now suddenly racing. You're noticing more details than you were before. You have dilated pupils. Your visual acuity actually improves. People can start to see longer distances and better acuity in their peripherals, which would be important if you're being attacked by something. Your respiration increases. This feels like a tightness in the chest. What your body is actually doing is sending your muscles more oxygen so that it can act effectively. Your heart rate is increased. This again is sending more activity and blood flow and strength to your muscles so that if you have to act, you could as optimally as possible. Your digestion is inhibited. This can sometimes cause nausea. This can cause stomach upset and urgency to use the bathroom. We now have a tight chest. Some people feel like that vagal choking sensation in their throat. The muscle tension that we have can cause achiness in our muscles and our back. It can even cause headache. It can feel like an oppressive weight is on someone. Some people feel like they can't breathe. There's a sensation of doom created by the cortisol and adrenaline response. So even though this is a normal, healthy response, it feels terrible, or at least very unpleasant. So a lot of people would want to avoid that. The issue though, is that if this didn't feel bad, you wouldn't be paying attention to it. And your body is trying to get you to pay attention. So it is uncomfortable, but it is natural. And it is something that we can learn to tolerate. So that's why we start very small. We don't do things that are gonna cause us a panic attack. We're gonna do things that are gonna cause us a little bit of that discomfort. Maybe we feel a little bit of increased respiration. We start to feel a little bit of increased heart rate. Maybe we're sweating a tiny bit, or our stomach hurts a little, but we're definitely not going too far. But this is a huge reason why people will generally try to avoid feeling anxious, is because it feels terrible. We don't recommend people feel that terrible right away. We just want people to understand that this is a normal response of the body. Just like having a fever is a normal response for your body to increase its immunity and potentially kill off viruses. It's uncomfortable, you have the chills, you're super tired, maybe you're still sweating and you're cold at the same time, but it's a natural human function that supports our safety. So once we learn to stop, or I guess once we learn to understand while these sensations are uncomfortable, they're actually very adaptive and they help us perform our most optimally. So LeBron James, when he plays basketball so beautifully, he is not in rep and digest. He is in fight and flight. He is able to play so well because all of his muscles are activated. His mental acuity is better. He's breathing faster. His heart is beating faster. Everything is behaving the most optimally. Now, his situation is not scary, but he's definitely in a state of fight and flight so that he can behave the best. When we are in scary situations and we need to stand up in front of a group, we need to stand up for maybe our friend who's being mistreated, we need to make a scary phone call, we need to focus on a test that we're taking, our bodies will optimize our functioning in this way. It doesn't always feel pleasant, but it is the most optimal state. Some people even see these sensations as bravery, when they feel this sensation in their muscles, and they feel their breathing increase, and they feel this like rush through their body. They start to feel brave. That's what courage feels like. So knowing that it's not dangerous, and it is uncomfortable, but it is healthy and adaptive can sometimes help us resist anxiety less. We might try to avoid it less often if we understand that it is supposed to be uncomfortable and generally mostly tolerable. The other reason why a lot of people avoid anxiety is because they sometimes think it's dangerous. That if my heart feels this way, it's because I'm getting heart damage. If I'm breathing this fast, it means I'm gonna pass out. If I feel this anxious for this long, I'm gonna develop heart disease, I'm gonna have a stroke, it's gonna take years off my life. And this is really important to understand. Untreated chronic anxiety that goes on for a long time without intervention absolutely can contribute to stress-related disorders, cardiovascular disorders, autoimmune disorders, reproductive disorders, chronic untreated anxiety. But general anxiety, or anxiety that is treated and managed, is not dangerous. Very uncomfortable, but not dangerous. And this is important for the people who feel like their anxiety could hurt them. If they know that it can't hurt them, or if it probably would hurt them less if they treated it, then they'd be maybe a little more likely to do the things that make them anxious, avoid things less, seek out less safety behaviors, and ultimately have less anxiety as a result. So we don't necessarily want people with disordered anxiety to feel anxious forever. In fact, that's the opposite of what we want. There absolutely can be health impacts with that. But typical anxiety or short durations of pathological anxiety are not dangerous. And I see a lot of this sometimes in my practice where people are concerned, what's going to happen to me? I've been anxious my whole life. Is this bad for my health? And we tell them, no, your body is doing something normal and natural. And if you think about the history of humankind, things haven't been so great for so long. We haven't always had Netflix and takeout and phones. We've had wars and no locks on our doors and enemies and famine and disease. We've had a lot of bad things. And if everybody in the past was unable to manage anxiety and stress, I don't think we would have gotten this far. So generally speaking, things are pretty good now. But if we think about the history of humankind and how much stress and anxiety people have had to face, we do understand that it is uncomfortable. And in extreme degrees, for chronic reasons, it can sometimes increase stress-related disorders, but it is not actually dangerous. Uncomfortable, but not dangerous. So trying to be calm all the time is sometimes because it's uncomfortable, sometimes because people think it's dangerous. So people will try to overly calm themselves a lot. So they won't do anything that makes them nervous. They try to deep breathe constantly. They might monitor themselves. They might be always searching for this state of calm and avoiding feeling anything beyond blissful zen. But this is a mistake because with anxiety disorders, ultimately what we're trying to do, even with general anxiety, that is typical, we're trying to grow our capacity for feeling anxious. We're trying to increase our body's ability to manage anxious sensations and do things that make us anxious. So trying to maintain calm all the time is kind of like trying to train for a marathon by only stretching your legs. So it feels nice to stretch and feel limber, feel maybe like calm afterwards, it feels kind of good, but we're not actually making ourselves stronger. So trying to be calm all the time and thinking that will help our anxiety, unfortunately, isn't really doing the job. We have to practice feeling a little anxiety and strengthening our nervous system in order to ultimately have general anxiety that most people have. Because we always will have some, and the ability to tolerate it and understand that it is uncomfortable but not dangerous or harmful is a good perspective to have. But we also have to be willing to be anxious sometimes. And we also have to make sure we're not overly prioritizing constantly being in a state of calm. And we don't want to do that for our loved ones either. If we see a loved one or a friend being anxious, we really want to resist the temptation to tell them, hey, calm down. Everything's going to be okay. We can leave if you want. Those things sound like very loving, reassuring things to say, and they are. But we're also communicating to that person, you have to calm down right now. It's not acceptable for you to be anxious. Being anxious might be exactly what that person needs in order to grow their capacity to handle certain things, like the store, or social events, or spiders, or needles at the doctor's office. So we want to make sure we're not overly prioritizing staying calm at all times, because it's impossible. And also because it might actually make us more anxious as a result. We have to be willing to do things that make us anxious. We have to be willing to feel a little anxious if we are ultimately hoping to be less anxious less often. So I recognize that it feels like a trap, but I do promise it's worth it. So next to last is something that I think is really important to learn. And it has to do with your thoughts. So we've been talking a lot about anxious sensations and anxious behaviors, but it would be a mistake to avoid talking about anxious thoughts as well. So when we are more anxious, we tend to have more anxious thoughts. This is called negative attentional bias. Some of us have that more naturally, some of us don't, and only when we're anxious. But it's a tendency for your brain to focus mostly on anxious sensations, mostly on threatening stimuli in your environment. So let's just say in this room, maybe we're checking out the lights above us. Maybe we're thinking about the electrical. Maybe our attentional bias is focusing on what everybody thinks of me, or whether or not I'm making too much noise. So our negative attentional bias focuses on things that could be threatening. But if we believe everything we are thinking, we are way more likely to be anxious. Turns out that not everything you think is real. Your thoughts are illusions. I heard somebody say a long time ago, and I loved the analogy, that your thoughts are basically burps from your subconscious. They're kind of random and they don't always mean anything. But this is useful to know because if we buy into everything we think, then we're way more likely to be anxious. If I'm driving on the road and I'm noticing the car next to me kind of seems a little close, and in my head I'm thinking, they're gonna run into me. And now I'm looking at them. And now I'm kind of swerving a little bit, and I'm probably not being a very safe driver. I'm believing everything I think. Now I'm actually making myself unsafe. Instead of thinking, okay, I think that they're close to me. Maybe they are, maybe I slow down a little bit, but I'm gonna try not to hype myself up too much. So if we're more able to clock our anxious thoughts, or not buy into all of them. So let's just say you go to a social event or a family event, and one of your thoughts is, oh my God, what if everybody hates me? Everybody hates me here. I should just leave. Pretty much nobody is excited that I came, and they definitely don't like the food that I brought. And we are starting to now believe everything we're thinking. Now we're really anxious. Now we really want to leave. And we might leave. And everybody's going to wonder, why did we leave Thanksgiving? What's going on? What happened? Like, why is she okay? So we might believe everything we're thinking as truth and facts and miss a lot of opportunities because we're seeing something that isn't there. And I have some examples of this. My first example, for some of you math nerds, or if you're an art nerd, you might see this also. This is the Mueller-Lear illusion. So if you've seen this before, you already know what it is. But essentially, the top line, the middle caret in the middle, is technically the exact mathematical center of that line, but it doesn't look like it, does it? No, the bottom two lines are exactly the same length, exactly. But they don't look like it, do they? So this is kind of fun. This is where illusions can tell us a lot about how what we think isn't real. So even though we're looking at this, the illusion of the carrots tricks our eyes into thinking that these are two different sizes. But if we use evidence, if we check facts, maybe I get out my ruler, or I just know this, I've seen it before, so I have evidence. I'm looking for reasons to disconfirm what I think could be true. So maybe I'm at the family function and I'm looking around and I'm wondering, does everybody hate me? But nobody really looks upset. I'm looking at people's facial expressions, nobody's glaring at me, not everybody walked out of the room when I came in. I've seen them eat the dish that I brought. So now I'm looking for evidence that disconfirms my fearful thought. I might have to try really hard to look for that evidence. But if I buy into every anxious thought I have, I'm tricking myself into thinking the world is more dangerous than it appears. So I really like this illusion because it is a great experience of what we are thinking isn't always true. So I have another experiment for you. And this involves, I guess my formatting wasn't that great. It's supposed to say exercise. So this involves thought diffusion. So fusion meaning fused together and one and the same. Diffusion meaning separating. So I'd like you all to think of a thought, a negative one, or a fearful thought. The example I provided above is I'm not good enough. Or what if my car doesn't start when I leave here? What if everybody hates me? What if I get fired? I'm the worst person ever. Maybe I'm so stupid. Everybody just should leave me alone. So think of a really negative thought. And now I want you to notice how that feels in your body and even your mind. When you say, I am whatever this is, or what if this thing. I'd like you to say it a couple more times just to notice how that feels. Now we're gonna try something. I'm gonna ask that you add a little bit to the beginning. And I'd like you to add, I'm having the thought that, this thought. Try that a couple more times. I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough. And notice how that feels in your body. Notice if you sense any changes. We're gonna push a little bit harder on this one. Now I'd like you to add even more. I'm noticing that I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough. I'm noticing that I'm having a thought that insert negative thought. Notice how that feels in your body. Most people report that when they start to add some distance to these thoughts, they start to feel a little less true. They start to feel more just like thoughts, things that they are noticing as inner phenomena that might not actually be reality. So not only do we want to recognize that our thoughts are not always facts, sometimes they are illusions, but practicing thought diffusion with anxious thoughts can be really useful. This can also be useful if you have a loved one next to you. Let's just say you bring a friend to Thanksgiving and they say, I don't know, man, this is really bad. I think everybody in here hates me. And then you say, so you think everyone in here hates you? And they say, yeah, I'm thinking everyone in here, like your whole family probably hates me. So you're saying, okay, so you're noticing, you're thinking that my whole family might hate you. And they go, yeah, I feel like I'm thinking that. But you might start to notice them de-escalating. You might start to notice them noticing they're having a thought and maybe being able to challenge it. So not only is this helpful for ourselves, we can actually use this to help other people too. So believing everything we think tends to escalate anxiety. Our minds are naturally predisposed to notice threatening stimuli in our environment. If it wasn't like that, we wouldn't have survived this long. When you go hiking in the woods and out of your periphery, your brain sees a snake and you jump. It's mostly not. But if it only thought, well, that's probably a stick, you're fine. But in case you were wrong and now you get bit, well, that's not very good for your survival. So we have a natural survivor's bias, a natural negative attentional bias that helps us survive. But unfortunately, because most of our environment now involves people, doctor's appointments, driving long distances, meetings that won't take place for 6 months, paying your taxes in April, all these other things that are not necessarily immediate dangers, our brains are a little bit less equipped to handle those effectively. So we still have this negative attentional bias, but it tends to also notice a lot of things in our environment that might not actually be immediately dangerous. They're more so things that might potentially be dangerous, possibly someday, but even then the chances aren't that high, but just in case though, this is the thing that might happen. So we possess our own ability to recognize inner anxiety. Sometimes our body does this for you if you're in immediate danger, but less so because most of the time we're not in immediate danger, which is great. But most of the time when we're having anxiety, we want to make sure we're recognizing, is this something that's actually happening? Or is this a thought that I'm having? Can I notice that thought? Can I name that that is a thought? And usually this helps us feel a little less anxious. We might still feel a little anxious, but we're way less likely to avoid things out of danger. We're way more likely to engage, and we're way more likely to be effective at getting out of that anxiety cycle because we're able to recognize what's reality and what might be a thought. Thanks for participating in that with me. I always really like that exercise. So lastly, don't believe everything you think. And I made it really big so that you'd all remember. All right, our last misinformation myth, thinking things will never get better. This is a pretty bad myth. Essentially, some people, a lot of people actually, especially in the thick of their anxiety, whether it's general and typical, that they only feel sometimes, or disorder, that they feel all the time, think that this anxiety is me, it is my life, I am anxiety, and I will never get better. This is just who I am, I'm just stuck that way. Or you might know someone in your life who is saying things like, you know what, that's just me, I'm just an anxious person, that's just how I am, so I just don't go to those things. I don't show up to family events because I'm just anxious. Or I don't leave my house ever because I'm just anxious and there's nothing I can do about it. This is a really damaging myth. It's also a symptom. So this is kind of interesting. We are more likely to follow our anxiety if we believe everything we think. And if you think that your anxiety can never get better, you're not as likely to challenge it. You're not as likely to start doing things that you are avoiding. You're not as likely to seek out help. You're not as likely to challenge your thoughts. So this thought, on top of being a myth and misinformation, is also a symptom of anxiety. Believing too much that our fear has to control everything and is our entire identity is definitely something that we want to challenge. We want to help people understand that anxiety, while common, is highly treatable. It might not always be curable. Some people will struggle with anxiety at different points in their lives, at different intensities. They might even have several kinds of anxiety. I call this buffet style, where you have a lot of different kinds of anxiety. I'm one of these people. I had horrible separation anxiety as a little kid. I'm sure it drove my mom nuts, but she loves me very much. I had a lot of social anxiety for pretty much ever. I've experienced a lot of panic attacks. I had a job that was in a basement, and I kept feeling like I was going to be trapped down there, and I had a lot of panic. I thought I shouldn't go to work. I thought I should leave anytime I was anxious, and I was so wrong. Even therapists can sometimes buy into some of these myths. So I share this not to scare you about having anxiety, mostly to share that a lot of people experience these symptoms, and a lot of people, when they have those symptoms, feel like things can't get better, but they absolutely can. Very common to experience anxiety, probably one of the most common, along with depression, but highly, highly treatable. So some information I'd like to share about how treatable it is related to some fun data. So essentially, this is a lot, so you don't have to read it all. I'll just kind of briefly go over it. So some of you might be familiar with CBT, or cognitive behavior therapy. Cognitive behavior therapy is a special kind of therapy that directly addresses the interconnectedness between our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. And because we know our anxiety is influenced by our thoughts and our behaviors, CBT is especially effective. It's not the only treatment out there, but it is highly effective. For a lot of people, so a meta-study, which is essentially a study of many studies, is able to reveal that according to most data, and this is why it's a range, it's a meta-study, so different studies give different rates, but most people with anxiety disorders have remission rates around 50 to 60% if they engage fully in a CBT type of modality. So when I say remission, generally that means they don't have symptomatic anxiety anymore. They don't have disordered anxiety anymore. They still have anxiety, because we all do, but they don't have anxiety to the degree that it is now clinical disorder. There are quite a few people who can't meet complete remission because anxiety can sometimes be really tricky or very persistent, especially if someone's anxiety has to do with a health issue. So because we also need to make sure we're considering a health issue or a history of trauma or in particular invalidating environment. Maybe someone works as emergency personnel, and that is a lot of anxiety for them. So quite about half of people can experience remission in terms of they don't have disordered anxiety. But a lot of people can reach still clinically significant improvement. Their anxiety disorder might still be present. They might still feel triggered. They might still feel panic attacks occasionally, but they don't necessarily have symptoms to the degree that they are impaired in their life. They can work, they can engage, they can go see their friends, families, they can do value-based hobbies, they can engage in their faith community. They can do all these things that before might not be possible. They might still have symptoms, but they are able to be way more functional. So initial remission is pretty high. So most people get better with anxiety pretty quickly. It's actually kind of amazing. Human beings are incredibly adaptable. So earlier when I made that comment about your Halloween candy and how you might not like it after you eat it 30 times a day for a month, anxiety tends to dissipate pretty quickly. Our fear response is pretty adaptive. When we learn something is safe, our response to that tends to actually be pretty quick. Other kinds of sensations are sometimes take a little longer. So sensations of disgust, sensations of shame, for example, those take a little bit longer to dissipate after time. Anxiety, though, actually tends to be pretty quick. So remission rate is generally high. And depending on the disorder, this may be more or less stable. So some disorders can remain that consistency for quite a while. They might not need as much maintenance care. Other disorders definitely do. So for example, social anxiety is a disorder that can improve, but tends to need more maintenance care than something like a phobia. So somebody might be able to remit their symptoms of arachnophobia, fear of spiders, but they might still fear people for a little bit longer and need a little more maintenance care. So depending on the disorder and the person, some of the results vary, and that's important to know. I definitely don't want to give like a black and white view of how treatment works and how effective it is, but I do at least want to give a broad overview of how effective treatment can be for anxiety. So I know we talked a little bit about CBT, but for all treatment modalities, so we include things like EMDR, ACT-based treatment, IFS, using it. I know I sound like an eye chart, I'm using a lot of acronyms here, but other kinds of treatment modalities, we still see a pretty similar amount of effectiveness. The meta study that I referenced here includes 70%. Long-term effectiveness, again, varies by disorder. Some people tend to feel better for longer, and some people need more maintenance care. Some people go on to still need medication, some people don't. But because we're also treating behaviors and thoughts, a lot of the time the ability to maintain is pretty effective. So if you can train yourself how to think something differently, or do something differently, and you can stick with it, the ability to maintain those results regardless of the disorder. So just some things to understand. Believing that you can't get better is not only incorrect and is a symptom of anxiety, it's also something that might limit you. You might be less likely to seek treatment and be willing to talk about it and go seek someone out. And I really do want to share this information just to show how effective it can be. So I do want to demystify what would treatment look like. Some people in this room might have been to therapy before, and they might know how it works, you know, what you do, what you talk about. Some people have not. Some people have never been to therapy. Like some people in my family who know what I do have no idea what it is. And I think they think I'm some kind of shaman or wizard, that I might just say magic words and I make people feel better. And sadly, I am not. I'd probably make way more money if I was some kind of psychic, but I don't. So unfortunately, that's not how it works. So if you don't know, or maybe you're therapy curious, and you just kind of want to know a little bit more, and if this is what helps somebody be able to take that next step, I absolutely want to do. So there's no gatekeeping. Essentially, therapy starts with a correct diagnosis. There is nothing wrong with self-diagnosis, but it's just that on average, most people are not very good at it. We are actually not that great at observing ourselves objectively as human beings. So when you tell a doctor something or a therapist something, they might still ask a lot of questions. You might come away with the diagnosis you thought, or you might be surprised. There's a lot of ways that anxiety can show up. So we do want to encourage people to be open-minded. So it starts with the correct diagnosis. And this is very important because the correct diagnosis will get you the correct kind of treatment. The correct kind of treatment is going to be what's going to get you farther than not the correct kind of treatment. So next, on top of learning your disorder, you'll learn about your anxiety symptoms and what contributes to it. How do your thoughts contribute to your anxiety? How do your behaviors contribute? What about your environment, your relationships, your health? your overall well-being, your activity level, your diet. Maybe you drink 3 monsters a day and you wonder why you're so anxious. So we really want to make sure we're having a full holistic view of why somebody might be anxious so that we can provide the best advice. It sometimes includes tools. So there are some specific techniques and tools and treatment protocols that are recommended. So with this kind of therapy for anxiety, it goes way beyond just talking. Some people I've heard say, well, I go to my doctor and I talk to him. So like, what else could they possibly tell me? Like, what else could I possibly talk about? Well, it's not just about the talking, it's the doing, like we learned earlier. What we do when we're anxious has a lot to do with whether or not we stay anxious or if things can improve. This will sometimes involve medication or not, doesn't always. This will sometimes involve family or support persons or not. I see quite a few spouses, I see quite a few parents, even sometimes roommates, as a way to help support the person with anxiety. Because they can see me once a week, but they see them every day. And a trusted loved one in someone's life has a way better ability to provide that person with encouragement and the right kind of support if we can include them in. It's also optional, people don't have to do that, but we do like to offer that to people in case that's useful. So in case therapy is not for you, or you know people who could use it, but maybe they're not ready, or they don't have access, they can't afford it, they just don't have the time. There are so many books, podcasts, support groups, webinars, seminars, YouTube videos, professionals who share free information. This is one of those things, which I'm so proud to work for Lindner Center and that they offer this. This is one of the best places I've worked. And the first place I worked at that really provides so much to the community. We can only see so many patients in a day, but we can see so many people at an event like this, which is terrific. So if you are curious, we do want to make sure that people look into information that is reputable. Anybody can go online and call themselves an expert of anything. And I'm sure you all seen that. And this can be dangerous because people who don't have the right training and credentials can sometimes spread a very dangerous, harmful misinformation that can make people worse, or at best, just not get any better. So we do want to make sure people know where to find reputable information. The references that I listed here are references that professionals use. So this is where we stay up to date on research. We go to conferences, we share resources with patients and their families. One of my favorite is the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, highly reputable resource. They also offer free support groups, a lot of book recommendations. So for people who aren't ready for therapy, don't have time for therapy, can't afford therapy, or maybe they're just not ready yet, this is a really, really great place to start to get the right information about what kinds of things could be supportive. A lot of it will reference a lot of the myths that I talked about today. There's so much more information to that. My next favorite is the Social Anxiety Association. They have their own association. A lot of their support groups are really great because you don't have to turn on your camera because they know that if you have social anxiety, you wouldn't go if you had to turn on your camera. So they're very, very good at helping support people. There's a lot of great research there. Another one that is important is the International OCD Foundation. OCD is not technically an anxiety disorder in the book that we use to reference disorders, but anxiety tends to be a very common symptom of OCD, so I also like to include that as well. But they have their own separate resourcing there too. So those are my three favorites. There's certainly others out there, but I really want to make sure that if people are doing research online, they're actually getting the right information from sources that we trust, that use evidence and facts and other wealths of information from researchers so that you know what you're getting is something you can believe in. So that's important when it comes to therapy. If you do start to believe that it can work for you, this is what it might look like. But if you're not ready for that or you can't access it, these are some other resources. This is a cool picture that I found because there's also something really important to know. If you are a person who doesn't believe that they can manage their anxiety, they're just too anxious, they're just like that, they'll be anxious forever, that's just how they are, they're fine to just stay home, they're fine to just never enjoy hobbies, they are okay with not engaging fully in life, they've resigned themselves to fear. It is something to reflect on with the generations of people that have come before us in times that have not been this luxurious or safe, to remember that we have the capability to be courageous and resilient. And the only reason any of you are sitting here is because you have generations of proof that people before you have shared their DNA with you, that have been courageous and resilient and have faced fears. People who go through starvation, people who go to war, people who experience famine, people who have gone through tremendous atrocities in history weren't not anxious about it. They 100% were. Everybody would be so scared, but they also believed they could do it. Sometimes they didn't have a choice. They had to do it. But this is important to reflect on because each and every one of us here comes from an entirely successful lineage of survivors and people who have faced so much. So if you don't believe that you don't have what it takes to face your anxiety, I challenge you to think about all of the people that came before you that fought so hard for you to be here, that have been able to tap into their courage and be able to face their fears, do things that they would avoid, challenge their fearful thinking. And that's something I think a lot of us forget about. We don't always think about how much the people who came before us had to be strong. And we have that ability, we have it inside of ourselves. So that's another thing I really wanted to add. So just to kind of recap everything that we've been talking about, basically anxiety is normal and it happens to all of us, but some of us, it happens to us in very, very large ways. So we can have typical anxiety or we can have disordered anxiety, or you can also have both. Relying on avoidance though, or quick fixes is usually a bad idea and is not a sustainable solution. It will give you temporary relief, but it won't actually help your anxiety in the long term. And that is something that we want to support people in doing, especially if their anxiety is debilitating. We also want to share that lasting improvements can absolutely happen. Anxiety is highly treatable. It's incredibly common and it can be debilitating, but it is absolutely treatable as long as you have the right kind of support and information. So I really want to thank all of you for joining me tonight. This has just been wonderful. I would love to take some questions. So I know that this has been a lot of information, and I'm wondering if maybe there are some curiosities. So first, I'll ask the room. So does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask? No pressure. But if you're too anxious to ask me and you want to, then I'm going to challenge you to try to face that fear, just in case you're bold. Okay, I'm going to make eye contact with all of you just to make sure. All right, it seems like maybe not. We will have time for that though. I'm curious if there are questions from the chat.
There are.
All right, great.
So, would you please address medication and benefits / drawbacks, starting it before versus after puberty for a child with anxiety?
Okay, so the question is addressing positives and benefits, risks and benefits for starting medication for a child before or after puberty. That is a really great question because we don't necessarily want to give children something that could be harmful. Unfortunately, I am not a prescriber, so I don't necessarily possess the qualifications or training or intelligence to be able to give that person some specific answers. But I can tell them where they can find that. So they can ask their general practitioner, or if they already have a nurse practitioner, psychiatrist, or a psychiatrist, I would recommend that they reach out to that person and ask them, what kinds of medications are safe for growing bodies, and what medications are not safe for growing bodies? I would really love to answer that, but I also recognize that is out of my scope, and it would be irresponsible of me to share something that I don't actually know. So, sorry that I can't answer that.
No, perfect. I have another one that is going to take a while to read this.
Okay.
No, literally, it's going to take a while. So, how do you know when an exposure is too much? My daughter has had issues having quasi panic attacks in public and getting stuck places that she drives for hours at a time due to not wanting to miss out on a possible positive interaction with strangers or not knowing where to go afterwards. Or she'll drive to go to an event and never make it there because she becomes too anxious to drive all the way and stops somewhere along the trip and can stay there for hours. Excuse me. This seems related to OCD, but we haven't yet heard of anyone else who experiences these behaviors And no therapist she's worked with has been able to affect this behavior much. Some therapists have suggested she focus on her values and perhaps the places she's headed to, or what she does after she ends up at this place, and do not reflect her values, dependent. Then says she doesn't want to go to X event that badly, and that's why she didn't make it. Though maybe she was just too anxious to make it without tools or without a safe person with her. Her primary diagnosis is PTSD or CPTSD, which of course includes anxiety. This daughter also seems to have a nearly clinical level of FOMO, especially regarding missing a future partner, a friend, person to network with at various events. But she rarely leaves the house or make it to these events. So there is nearly chronic anxious dissatisfaction with her decisions. Regarding a future partner fear, she's had a dysfunctional relationship on and off for 3 years with someone who has substance use disorder. So it seems like there is a revolving feeling of insecurity. If you have any thoughts, I think she has seen many therapists over the past years, and she is now in EMDR therapy.
You're right. Thank you so much for reading all of that. There's a lot of details. First of all, so it sounds like this person is concerned about her daughter, for those of you who may or may not have been able to hear, who has tried a lot of approaches, who still really struggles with anxiety and panics when she tries to achieve or attend some of these events. And one person mentioned to her trying to see her behaviors through values. So it's something that she wants to go to more important than having a panic attack there. So it really does sound like there's a lot going on. And I do have to share that I can understand the frustration and not really having the right kinds of answers. And this person not achieving the kind of success. Sometimes panic attacks are really, really tricky to treat. It's not always the situations that cause the panic sensations themselves can be so debilitating and disturbing and distressing that a person will avoid situations even they very much want to go to because they can't stand feeling panicked. So this person sounds like they are really struggling with the sensations of panic themselves. So this is something we didn't exactly cover earlier when we talked about exposures. Exposures to situations can be very helpful. For people with panic attacks, exposure to panic sensations can also be helpful. So with a guided therapist under the supervision and direction of a professional, a person with panic attacks might do exposures to sensations in their body. They might do jumping jacks to expose themselves to a sensation of racing heart. They might rapidly breathe on purpose to expose themselves to a sensation of hyperventilation. So sometimes when people have panic attacks, they absolutely do avoid events because those events can present panic. But it's not just the events themselves. Sometimes it's the sensations. So I can't exactly give this person specific treatment advice because they're not my patient currently. But it also seems like sometimes the way we look at exposures can be a little too outward, and sometimes we have inner exposures to try. So I know that doesn't exactly address every single one of this person's concerns, but I hope that might be a creative way to start thinking. Maybe this person would be willing to speak to their provider to ask more, if that's okay. All right, no other questions? All right, so I want to give people who were brave enough to come here tonight just one more opportunity to ask any questions or share any concerns or offer any feedback. So just one more chance to ask how people are feeling and if they have any curiosities. Yes.
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. Please say thank you. It's very helpful, very relatable. I thought you were fantastic.
And thank you so much. So for those of you who couldn't hear, she thought I was amazing and I didn't.
Fantastic.
Fantastic, thank you. I would love it if all of you could give Bob a hand. He's worked so hard. For the last time.